Long ago in old Japan, there lived an old woman on a little house halfway up a hill. She had a pig and some chickens and a nice little garden behind her house. But one day, as she was making some rice balls, she picked up her bowl of completed balls and tripped. The balls fell onto the floor, and since she lived on a hill, they rolled across the floor and down the hill. She chased down after them, and they came to rest right at the foot of the hill next to a great flat rock. But as she came closer to the rice ball, she saw a long, scaly blue arm with 3 fingers reach out from a hole in that rock and pull the rice balls in. She said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she chased after that arm, right through the little hole and down a path in the darkness. She was chasing a great big lumbering creature, but it was so dim she couldn't see what it was, until she came to a great cave. The cave had glowing moss on the walls, and she could finally see who had stolen her rice balls. It was a group of oni. Oni are like ogres, with horns on top of their heads, and green skin, and a mouth that goes from ear to ear, full of sharp, sharp teeth. And she saw that one oni sharing the rice balls with the others. Now, some people might have been afraid when they see a creature like that, but when she saw them steal her food, she was more angry than afraid. She said, "Hey, what do you think you're doing? You're stealing my food!" And the oni stopped and slowly turned to look at the little woman. They narrowed their eyes and rubbed their stomachs. And now the old woman was feeling frightened. Oni had been known to eat people before. But the one who had stolen the rice balls looked at her and said, "Did you make this food?" And she said, "Yes, of course, I make very good rice balls." "Good. Then you'll make some more for us." And he grabbed the little old woman by the arm and began leading her, not all that gently, through the cave passageways, in and out of rooms, until he came to a great cave that was full of pots and pans. There was even a space for a little fire, and a little hole in the ceiling where the smoke escaped. He set a pot down right next to the fire. He dumped in some water and 3 grains of rice. The old woman said, "That'll never make enough rice balls to feed all of you." "It will with this," he said, grabbing a wooden paddle, sort of a wooden spatula, and handing it to the woman. "Stir with this and you'll have plenty of rice." So she did, and to her amazement, as she stirred, those bits of rice grew and grew until it was a whole pot full of rice. And she made a batch of rice balls, eating a few along the way just to fill her belly. She figured, they stole my food, I might as well have some food now. And day after day, she fed the oni, and they liked her rice balls so much they wouldn't even think of hurting her. And after a few days, she found out where the water comes from that she uses in her cooking. There's a little underground stream. She figured, well, that must be the stream that comes out at the bottom of my hill. I bet if I could find a boat somewhere, I could float out and escape. Everyone knew, of course, that oni couldn't cross water. Once she was in a boat, she'd be perfectly safe. The only problem was oni also don't have boats. So she thought and she thought and she thought, every day and every night. Oni, being monsters, of course, slept during the daytime. And one day, as she was thinking, she came up with a wonderful idea. The largest of the cooking pots was bigger than her. She could use that as a boat. So early the next morning, when the oni had fallen asleep, she took her magical rice paddle, dropped it into the biggest of the pots, and began dragging the pot through the caves to the stream. As she set the pot in the water, sure enough, it floated. And so she climbed inside and began paddling with that magic rice paddle. She'd just gotten out into the stream when she heard a voice saying, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" It was an oni. She must have woken him as she dragged the pot through the cave. and she began paddling as fast as she could to get away from the Oni, but she knew she was safe. Oni, of course, they can't cross water. But as she was paddling, she saw the stream getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The Oni had begun sucking up the water until the stream disappeared completely, and the pot ground to a halt on a sand and gravel stream bed. The great big Onis, like great water balloons, began waddling out toward the old woman, and she knew she had to do something to get that water back. So she put her thumbs in her ears and said, "It was such a funny face to make, and the Oni, of course, loved tricks and jokes. They saw her, they said, "Pa!" And as the Oni laughed, the water spewed from their mouths and filled the stream once more, washing the old woman in the pot right out of the cave entrance and onto the stream that flows just below her hill. She paddled a ways further to get away from the Oni's cave, and then paddled to the shore. She climbed out and let the pot float downstream even further, hoping to confuse the Oni if they come after her at night time. And she walked up the hill to her house once again. And people say after that she always had plenty to eat. And she'd always make her sweet rice balls every day of the week. And since she had so much rice with her magic rice paddle, she always gave the extras to her neighbors and her friends. And every once in a while, if after making a beautiful batch of rice balls she trips and some of the rice balls roll across the floor and down the hill, she just smiles and says, we'll let the Oni have those. And that's the end of that.